Hello, welcome to the Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. I'm Natalia Shpilova-Said, and thank you so much for attending our event. Today, we have the opportunity of speaking with Oleksandr Yaroshchuk. Oleksandr Yaroshchuk is a Fulbright Visiting Researcher at the Indiana University's Media School. He is a Ph.D. candidate in mass communications and a senior lecturer at the Mohyla School of Journalism, National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Oleksandr Yaroshchuk is working on a dissertation on the status of investigative journalism in Ukraine. He received his master's degree in journalism from the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. In 2019, Oleksandr Yaroshchuk was a visiting researcher at the universities in Germany and Finland. Oleksandr works for the Ukrainian fact-checking organization StopFake and contributes to different projects as a disinformation expert. We will start with our lecture. Please submit your comments and questions via your Q&A option, and all questions and comments will be addressed after the lecture. At this point, I would like to welcome Oleksandr, and thank you so much for joining us today. Oleksandr today will be speaking about the Crimea Platform and Ukraine's independence in the Russian media.
Thank you, Natalia, for introduction and for the invitation to give this talk. I would just like to add that my primary topic here as a Fulbrighter is investigative journalism, but besides this, I am also interested in disinformation and propaganda and fake news, and that's why I worked together with StopFake on debunking disinformation. And today I would like to present you some of our recent work on how Russian media portrayed and described and talked about the Crimea Platform and the 30th anniversary of the restoration of Ukrainian independence. Actually, two of the most important events of the last several months. And this actually also were the one of most important events for the Russian media as well, especially in August, because they paid a lot of attention to this. However, both they tried, and I will talk about this later, that they both tried to denigrate these events, but also at the same time, they wrote so much about this that many people in Russia knew about the Crimea Platform, for instance. So I'll start sharing my screen. I guess, I hope it works. If it's not, let me know, Natalia, but it has to. Yeah, just a moment, okay. So actually, I will tell maybe a few words about StopFake for those who do not know. StopFake is a Ukrainian fact-checking organization which was created in March 2014. Actually, the first debunk on the website was published on March 2nd, 2014, right when in the process of the occupation of Crimea. And at that time, our team was working on debunking disinformation about Crimea, events in Crimea, and late in April events in Donbass, which were unfolding.
Sorry, Oleksandr, I was
yes.
supposed to see your PowerPoint presentation at the moment because we don't see it.
You don't see, okay. Okay, I got it, yeah, okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Yes, now we see it.
No, okay, perfect. Thank you. And actually, since then, we'll be working now like almost more than 7 years. And at the moment, we concentrate not only in Crimea and Donbass. We actually concentrate on different narratives and how Russian media write and talk about Ukraine in general. So it's everything that concerns Ukraine, actually, mostly Ukraine, but also some other countries like Poland or the EU, which are related to the events in Ukraine. And besides this, I would like to mention that StopFake has 13 or 14, sometimes it changes language versions. So There are people who work for StopFake not only in Ukraine, but also in some other countries like Poland, Italy, and they debunk pro-Kremlin disinformation, which is spread via specifically Polish or Italian media, because as you may know, Russia has international media networks such as RT, former Russia Today, and Sputnik, which has language versions in different countries. For instance, RT has German version, Spanish version, French version, and English version, and Arabic, whereas Sputnik has up to 20. So they cover almost all Eastern Europe, the Caucasus region, and a great part of Europe, plus Turkey. So that's why it's necessary to work with different language environments and different countries. But today, I would like to focus on the Crimea Platform and how Russia portrayed Ukraine's independence. I mean, by this, the 30th anniversary of Ukraine's independence. So we will first start with the Crimea Platform. So this is the logo of the Crimea Platform. Actually, the Crimea Platform was created this year as an attempt of the Ukrainian government and the civil society organization to boost the discussion about the issue of Crimea, about the occupation, because for some people and for the Ukrainian diplomatic service, the foreign ministry, the issue of Crimea was seen as on the sidelines. So we heard a lot about the occupation of Donbass, Ordlo, the so-called Ordlo, and the Normandy format, the Minsk agreements, and so on and so forth. But the Crimea was a little bit overshadowed by this. But now, thanks to this initiative, it's again on the first pages of newspapers, and diplomatic representatives of Ukraine, politicians, and not only in Ukraine, but in other countries started to talk about the issue of Crimea, about the occupation of Crimea more frequently. So this is why it's important to have such an initiative. The Crimea Platform started this year on August 23rd, on the day of Ukrainian national flag, with the inaugural summit, which was held in Kyiv. And actually more than 50 representatives of different states came to visit this event and to talk about how to deoccupy Crimea and pledge support for Ukraine, not for Russia. That was important for Ukraine. And in terms of reporting, how this event was reported in Russian media, I would like to mention here beforehand that they, in between August 20th and 25th, and on August 23rd, 25th, also they were talking about a lot about Ukrainian independence, the military parade in Kyiv. But in between this period, Crimea Platform, from when I was looking and reading their news feeds and watching some of their TV shows, talk shows, I understood that this was the main topic for Russian media, all of Russian media. So they didn't talk about anything else. So Crimea Platform was #1 event, #1 news that they were talking about. However, we might say that between this, before August 20th and after August 25th, 26th, roughly, they try not to mention Crimea Platform. So before this, they tried to say that there is nothing important, that there is no preparation to Crimea Platform, that it would be a fruitless initiative. And after August 25th, 26th, they were talking about or trying to show that Crimea Platform was a very unsuccessful initiative that produced no results whatsoever, and that there will be no consequences, any conclusions for Ukraine, that the issue of Crimea is solved, and that this was just some event that was that Zelensky, for instance, needed to push to improve his ratings in the country, in Ukraine. So I will talk a little bit about this more later. And what else here I would like to mention is that when we see how they reported this event, on the first place, they were disseminating, reporting how the Russian officials describe it and talked about it. So first of all, they wrote, they cited, for instance, Lavrov or Zakharova, foreign spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, or Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson. Also representatives of Crimea, so-called representatives of Crimea, like Aksionov or Konstantinov, who helped Russia to occupy the region in 2014. They paid almost no or very little attention to how Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian officials like President Zelensky or Prime Minister Shmyhal or Foreign Minister Kuleba described and talked about this event. And yeah, so this was like a very big difference about how they reported. So nothing, they almost nothing mentioned, they mentioned almost nothing about how Ukrainian side reported, whereas they were mentioning more about the official Russian reaction to this event. Like in percent, it would be like 90 to 10 approximately. So 5 priority areas of the Crimea platform are the non-recognition of Crimea, plus Ukraine by creating this initiative, it aims to increase the efficiency of sanctions and to promote the protection of human rights, because recently, since 2014 and recently, there are a lot of instances, cases when human rights of Crimeans, especially of Crimean Tatars, of those who oppose Russian occupation, were violated. Plus, there is a huge security issue in the region, in the Black Sea and in the Azov Sea. This was also, the Crimea platform was also an attempt to draw attention to these issues as well. A plus, and as a plus, Ukraine plans, make plans how to overcome adverse effects of occupation in Ukraine and in Crimea when it will be deoccupied. So economic restoration, social policies, human rights issues as well, and so on and so forth. So this is our 5 priority areas for the Crimea platform. And some people think the Crimea platform is just a governmental initiative without involving other stakeholders. It's not true. Actually, they managed to create Crimea platforms on 4 levels that in this way, representatives from different countries who support Ukraine can talk and build an agenda on how to deoccupy Crimea. And as you can see, there are 4 main levels. The first one is governmental. The governments cooperate on this issue. There is also a parliamentary level, including Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, where these issues are also discussed. Expert level and local level, because local authorities also have to understand how they cooperate and understand the future of this of Crimea. So here are 5 key disinformation narratives that were identified by myself and by the StopFake team. I wouldn't say that all of the news that were disseminated, distributed by the Russian media fall into one of these categories. But still, this was some of the most important narratives, comprising maybe 90 to 95% of the news that were distributed at the time. So the first one points attention to they try to portray the Crimea platform as some event that has no importance, that it is legally void, and that there is nothing that can be that can help Ukraine to return Crimea. So in this case, they try to denigrate the event as something which is not important at all. Another narrative talks about how Zelensky actually talked about this event and how much he talked and how it's important for him as an initiative that First of all, distracts attention from the most pressing social and economic issues on the first glance, and that there is his PR event that is supposed to increase his ratings for the general presidential ratings and for ratings for the presidential elections in 2024. Also, it is now a tradition for the Russian media to call everything which Ukraine does Russophobic event, an example of Russophobia or something, or anti-Russian event. And this was another case, obviously, because when Ukraine talk about and when representatives of the United States, the EU, NATO, when they mentioned that Crimea is Ukrainian and that it was occupied by Russia in 2014, of course, they always say that these statements are directed against Russia and its politics, and that Crimea can be only Russian, and that anyone who says that Crimea is not Russian is an example of Russophobia. The first narrative tried to draw attention to the fact that no one from the occupation authorities in Crimea was not invited and involved. And this is obvious because we understand that Crimea is occupied, and these people who represent Crimea now inside Crimea, they work for the Kremlin. But of course, there are people in Ukraine and in the government, in the parliament, who represent Crimea, those Crimeans who support Ukraine and that Crimea is Ukrainian, for instance, Mustafa Dzhemilyov or Rafat Chubarov. So the people who represent Majlis, who represent there is also the permanent representation of the president of Ukraine in Crimea. So everything is working even now when Crimea is occupied. But still, we have to understand clearly who exactly represent Crimeans. And in this case, not the people who helped the Kremlin to occupy the Crimea, but the people who support its constitutional status, which is being a part of Ukraine. And the last key narrative in this respect is that the Crimea Platform has no future. So that this is a fruitless initiative. And I mentioned this before when I was talking about this time frame, that after August 26, they didn't talk or write about Crimea Platform at all, just to pinpoint this by this media instrument that Crimean Platform is nothing more as a one-time event, and that's all. So now I will give you some examples of these narratives. So the first one is that Crimea Platform is void. Here you can see some two examples. Actually, there are more than two, of course, like a lot of them, sometimes dozens a day could be found, but I just wanted to show you some of them due to the limit of space and time. As you can see in this case, RIA Novosti, which is a Russian governmental news agency, reports cites one of the advisors to the head of Crimea, someone Krychkov, who says that this Crimea's platform summit is void, and that there is no not only guarantee, there is just no any perspectives for the Crimea Platform. And that another thing is that what they mention is that since from 2014 Crimea is a part of Russia, and it's like it's now a part, an integral part of Russia, as they say. There is nothing to discuss at serial level, and no one can discuss without Russia this issue. So this two aspects that they wanted to point attention to while talking about the legal aspect of the Crimea Platform. As a Russophobic event, again, the first one who mentioned this was the so-called head of Crimea Aksionov, actually the representative of the Kremlin, the occupation authorities, who said that Crimea Platform was full of lies and an example of Russophobia, and that that the lies were just as that Crimea is occupied and that there are human rights violations in Crimea, because this was human rights was one of the most important topic during the summit, and the Russian authorities, occupation authorities, they always denied these accusations. However, they actually were proved, and there are perfect examples of this, of how the human rights of the Crimeans are violated at the moment on different, these are social, these are economic rights, these are cultural rights, political rights, etc. Also, they wanted, actually here on in the second example, they mentioned that since the Crimea Platform summit was a gathering of Russophobic states, because everyone who supports Ukraine is actually evidently a Russophobic state now. However, they continue their business relations with the states. And that it's the last one says that it's an example of encroachment on the territorial integrity of Russia. And here they have dubious standards, as you can understand, because Russia, this is the side who does invade other countries, not Ukraine. Ukraine just tries to return its territory back. Here in this case, we see how Fond Federальное агентство новостей, the federal news agency, how they describe this event as Zelensky's PR campaign and as an attempt to distract attention from other economic and demographic problems. And that this was, first of all, not an attempt to get Crimea back, but for Zelensky to increase his ratings. And here, as in this case, we have a perfect example from Novorossiya. Novorossiya is a media, so-called media information outlet, but in case it's a disinformation outlet, which works for the Kremlin and represents kind of the authorities of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, Donetskaya Народная Республика. And they cite Yuri Kot, who's actually a Ukrainian. At the moment, he represents the council or something like this of Ukrainians in Russia. He went to Russia in 2014, but before this, he was a Ukrainian journalist working for television. And here they cite this Yuri Kot, who said that Crimean Platform is a one-time event and the world will forget about it. That's why I mentioned to you that that this is not true, and I mentioned to you that there are 4 levels of Crimea Platform as an initiative. And on these 4 levels, there are currently some work taking place, and there was on August 23rd, on this inaugural summit, they adopted a declaration, and now the representatives of Ukraine and other countries who attended the summit are working on this declaration on how to strengthen the sanctions against Russia and how to support the human rights in Crimea. And again, how the representatives of Crimea were not invited. And they also mentioned here that the reason for this was that Ukraine didn't want to inform anyone about the water and energy blockade of Crimea, which was imposed by Ukraine, which is, again, not true, because according to the international humanitarian law, only the occupation authorities have to take care of the land they occupy. Okay, another thing here, which is not a narrative, but a huge type of how they describe the event. Here, while they were saying that a lot of Russophobic states send their representatives to the summit, they also were saying that the West ignores the summit because the issue of Crimea is no longer important for the states, or they want to do business with Russia. And to to give example of this, they said that they were saying that major world leaders, some like Angela Merkel or Joe Biden or Emmanuel Macron, they decided not to visit the Crimean Platform, and they decided to send only, as they say, second or third tier politicians. Like, for instance, Germany and the United States, they said sent the energy ministers. But it was from some, in some cases, it was reasonable because later these ministers could talk and discuss with Ukraine the future energy cooperation with Ukraine and how Crimea could be involved into this when it is deoccupied. But in general, I would like to mention there were representatives of more than 40 states visiting the Crimea Platform, plus the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, and representatives of actually of the leading European countries like Turkey, Poland, and others. So almost all main Ukrainian partners were at the Crimea Platform Summit in August. And here are just some examples how different outlets like RIA Novosti or Izvestia wrote about this. Okay, and here just to end this up, I would like to point your attention to some of the summit achievements because, as I mentioned, Russian media wanted to denigrate the summit, which was actually a fruitless attempt by their side, because more people actually started to know about the Crimea Platform, and they also saw what are the discussions was there, and that Ukraine is actually supported by a variety of states. So the key achievements here is that the issue of Crimea is now again on the international agenda. Media talked about it, politicians talked about it. There are good cooperation now established on how this issue must be resolved. The world community once again reiterated that it does not support the occupation of Crimea, that Crimea is the territory of Ukraine and Russia has no right to claim this territory as its own, and that Russia needs to return the Crimea back to Ukraine, and that the sanctions would be enforced, will be enforced until the Crimea is deoccupied. The Crimean issue, contrary to Kremlin's claims and assertions, and is not closed. So they were working on this 7 years to try to close the issue, but it's not. And since, even though Russian media tried to denigrate the summit, the event, in fact, they only helped Ukraine to make it the top news event in Russia in August. Okay, now we have a few examples of how Ukraine's independence, anniversary of independence, was described by the media. And here are just some, I have here more, not only for, but also on the next slide, another 4 narratives of how this event was described. So unlike the Crimea Platform, anniversary of independence is an event which takes place every year. So every year they repeat this narrative, they repeat the same fakes that they have about Ukraine. For instance, like that Ukraine is not independent, that Ukraine is controlled or ruled from abroad, and there are like there is no independent President Zelensky or the Ukrainian parliament that they just implement the will of the Western governments or some international organizations like IMF. That Ukraine is a failed state, that it has achieved nothing, that Ukraine has no economy at all and no military. That's another narrative, common narrative. That Ukrainian economy is non-existent, which is actually a result of the previous narrative, where they say that Ukrainian economy is supported by the foreign money and that Ukraine is an indebted country. And now they also talk about how Ukraine will survive the winter in terms of the recent energy crisis in Europe and rising gas prices and coal prices. And the fourth one here is that there is nothing to celebrate, that Ukraine has achieved nothing, and that Ukrainian independence is just another example of Ukrainian nationalism, and so on and so forth. Concerning actually the military parade and this year anniversary of independence, they also pointed attention to the following facts: that NATO forces, representatives of NATO countries, were taking part in the military parade on the Independence Square, and they described it as a sign of colonialism of Ukraine, as a sign of it being externally controlled. They also were talking about that military equipment, which everyone could see on the Maidan, on the Khreshchatyk during the military parade, was given by NATO, but it was not. Actually, it was a Ukrainian equipment of the Ukrainian army. That there are no achievements to be proud of, that 30th anniversary of independence is an example, example of how Ukraine achieved nothing, which is not true as well. And that a military parade is a sign of growing militarism. Here they have some kind of a contradiction between here the first and second and the fourth narrative, because there could be no militarism without military equipment, obviously. But when they say that Ukrainian army is incapable of defending the country, and they say that there is a growing militarism, it doesn't work together at all. It couldn't be that they cannot, you cannot separate this. So it has to be something, one of this. Okay, and here just some brief examples. So here Komsomolskaya Pravda, another pro-Kremlin media outlet in Russia, reports that Ukraine became the poorest country in Europe in the last 30 years, and that before 1991 it was even more powerful than Germany, which is like in this article you have a lot of fakes, disinformation, and how things happened, and that Ukraine is not the poorest country as well, but they keep repeating it year and year, every year, that this fake. The RT, which I mentioned at the beginning, former Russia Today, they reported that Ukraine is on the path to collapse of the statehood, which is actually also one of the familiar narrative of the Russian media, because they report about the collapse of Ukrainian statehood almost every month when any event happens. So they try in this way to denigrate the Ukrainian achievements in the last years and to show that Ukraine is almost non-existent in this way. Also, Radio Sputnik tried to describe, to describe the event as the independence and the anniversary as some sad story where that Ukraine couldn't attract much attention to this, that Ukraine is not supported, however it is supported. And they also say in this article that representatives of NATO were on the military parade, and representatives of different countries attended the event, and they here kind of cite the experts from Ukraine about how they think Ukraine is doing at the moment after 30 years of being independent, which are actually pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin experts who either live in Ukraine or Russia, but who are usually seen on the pro-Kremlin media outlets and TV channels, and give interviews to pro-Kremlin newspapers. Even though they were saying about that Ukraine is controlled by the West, but they have some ambiguity about this, because in some cases they say that Ukraine is controlled by the West in general, but in the other say Otherwise, they say that Ukraine is dependent on the US. And here on this slide, you can see how Regnum wrote about it, that there is no Independence Day of Ukraine, but it is a day of dependence and US occupation. And here, live on this screenshot in this article, they write about that Ukraine became a colony since 2014. They say that former MP of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine gives his conclusions on the 30th year of Ukrainian independence. And this former deputy is Volodymyr Olinik, who was a member of the Party of Regions until 2014, and then he escaped to Russia when the Revolution of Dignity on the Maidan won. And since then, he has been living in Russia and visiting Russian TV channels and talking about how Ukraine is denigrating and collapsing, and that and actually he supports pro-Russian procurement politics concerning Ukraine and against Ukraine. Other topics of attention, so they have some general major narratives, but they also tried to distract attention from the military parade, from how the anniversary was celebrated, by pointing attention to some other minor events, such as that Zelensky, they were writing that Zelensky started to cry during giving a speech on the Maidan, that Poroshenko was dusted with a brilliant green, or that Poroshenko and Yushchenko didn't show any interest in the parade. Actually, some of these events happened, but the attention of the Russian media to these events were too big. Various other, of course, other aspects of the parade, of the events were denigrated and not described at all. So thank you for your attention. I am looking forward to your questions or comments that we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oleksandr. Yes, at this point we're ready to take questions and comments. But thank you so much for this informative and detailed overview of the major Russian narratives concerning the Crimea Platform and Ukraine's independence. And we have a question in our Q&A box. What actions can civic society take to help this initiative?
I guess it's very good that the authorities, the Ukrainian government, they decided to include the expert level or to the Crimea Platform. At the moment, as far as I know, there are this expert level, this civic cooperation on this issue is in the process of being established. So there are a group of Ukrainian NGOs who took part in the inaugural summit in August. So they were contributing to the final declaration. They were contributing to the event itself. And now they work with civil society representatives from other countries, from their partner countries, on how to make those issues more important, more urgent, and how to press on the governments in all of these states that they support Ukraine and do not forget about the occupation of Crimea, because obviously only the governments, those Ukrainian partners, only they can help Ukraine to deoccupy Crimea, because it's a political issue and economic issue. But also, I guess that civic society has to point attention to this. It has to show that this is not a one-time event, to draw attention to this, to always keep it in mind and on the agenda. That's very important. And also have cooperation on different levels, not only talking about, I talk here not only about politics, not like this, but also different cultural events that we have so that we could have different cultural events, share cultural experience, showing how Crimea is important to Ukraine in cultural sense, and how Ukraine is important to Crimea, that we share so many things in common. I guess help with distributing information about events in Crimea, especially human rights violations and so on.
There is a second part in this question. What concrete actions can Ukraine, not just the government, take to win the hearts and minds of the Crimeans?
I was thinking about this, but I am not sure how to respond to this. I guess it would better, I am not a Crimean, so it's hard for me to say what did Crimeans think before the occupation, during the occupation. What I mentioned when I was in Crimea, that many of them, even before 2014, didn't understand, didn't think of them as Ukrainians. They thought of them, first of all, as Crimeans. What I see is the most important is to improve, is to do something in the cultural field, I guess, in the education field. So Ukraine has to attract the new generation of Crimea to Ukrainian universities, help share cultural different events, etc. So I guess I would start from education and culture, probably. Yes, probably yes.
There is our next question. To what extent do you think the Russian public is influenced by such propaganda?
It's a little bit hard to answer, because no one in Russia can give you a proper answer, because we understand that all of this sociology it's not accurate. So in this sense, we don't know exactly how much attention the Russian public population pay to the disinformation on their media. But what I can see and assume, many actually people are not influenced by this propaganda, and they try to be to search for independent information. And actually, but mostly this happens in big cities, whereas in small cities and some distant regions, the situation might be different. Yeah, I guess. Unfortunately, it's really hard to answer this.
Thank you, Oleksandr. I would like to follow up on your comment about educational and cultural endeavors that can be undertaken in order to win the hearts and minds of those who are not quite convinced, probably at this point, that Crimea is Ukraine. Well, I really appreciate those headlines that you showed, that you shared with us. They were quite illustrative in terms of how disinformation is presented and how it's spread. I paid attention to the language that is used in these headlines. For example, they use formulations such as "no one is interested," "никого не интересует" in Russian. So, and in that "no one is interested," I'm included as well. So if I don't speculate too much in those phrases, I start thinking that, well, this topic is of no interest to me. Another phrase or another example can be "ведущие страны," leading countries. So which automatically reduces the importance of the Crimea Platform, of the Crimea Summit, because it sounds like some insignificant countries participated in that platform. Then in another example, I noticed that that Russian website uses the subtitle "бывший СССР," former USSR. So it can be innocent, but I don't believe that it's innocent, because still this post-Soviet space is presented as Soviet. On the one hand, it is presented as Soviet. On the other hand, it probably aligns with that strategy of Russia to reconstruct something that could be similar to the USSR. So my question is about this importance of language, and maybe it can be redirected to the Ukrainian context. How in Ukraine we can use the Ukrainian language or the Russian language in order to somehow produce this platform that could also be included into these endeavors to participate in the disinformation wars, because as you pointed out and as you demonstrated, disinformation wars are not only series of disinformation facts or disinformation details, but it's also about the language which is used in these wars and in these campaigns.
Yes, that's completely true. I agree with you. The language is one of the most important aspects of how disinformation is used, and sometimes, actually, very often, disinformation is not only about something which is not completely untrue. It's also about something true, but the way it is said, the way it is, the way. The picture, the video is showed how it's cut and paste. The way this all influences the final product, which is some article or some news, and they still, of course, by just pointing that this is former USSR, they point that Ukraine belongs to the Russian cultural civilization sphere field, that it's that no one in the West should claim Ukraine as being part of the West or Europe or NATO or the European Union. And for Ukraine, it's very important to distantiate itself from this former USSR, to remind that Ukraine is a country which is in the Eastern Europe, not in the former USSR territory. USSR was more than 30 years ago. Now we have a new reality, and to use the language more wisely. I would probably focus, if you talk about Ukraine, I would focus, of course, on Ukrainian language, because I believe that Ukraine as a separate state should build its own identity, and Ukrainian language is an essential part of this identity. When we talk about informing the world about Ukraine, then we should use other languages as well, like, first of all, English, German, Spanish, French, and other. Of course, we should also communicate with people who speak in Russian language. But this, first of all, we should communicate with people who are outside Ukraine, not in Ukraine. That's my personal understanding of this. And also, I would like to follow up a bit about what you mentioned, the states that visited, that not important states. In this respect, they always mention the Baltic states and Eastern European states like Poland or Romania, Hungary, or Slovak Republic. And also, when they talk about the states, they also always say that even now it's more often that the Baltic states are also this part of the former USSR, and that Poland and Hungary are in the sphere of influence of Russian Federation. So they claim now even larger, they have even bigger territorial claims than they used to have, at least on surface. Of course, they had these claims, some were hidden, but they didn't want to talk about this as much as they talk now.
Thank you. Thank you, Oleksandr. We have two more comments. Let me read out the first one. I found the prevalence in the Russian media of the narrative of Ukraine having been colonized by the West very interesting and ironic, given the annexation of Crimea by Russia. I'm curious whether these Russian media outlets are paying any attention to the emphasis placed on the need for decolonizing efforts in places like the United States in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. movement for indigenous rights, etc. Is there any awareness or acknowledgement of this decolonizing effort here among the Russian media, and any attempt to spin the stories about Ukraine in response or in resistance to this discourse? When they talk of Ukraine as having been colonized by the West, NATO, etc., is there any reference to these movements in the West?
Mm-hmm. When we talk about Ukraine, they usually do not talk about something else. So they usually talk about how that Ukraine is colonized, that Ukraine is occupied, and it's ruled by the West. So they just try to talk only about Ukraine. They also, of course, they had a lot of stories about the Black Lives Matter, the indigenous rights in the United States and around the world as well. So, but they didn't actually link it to one another. Maybe if we would pay attention to this RT in English, they would have something about this, but not in the Russian media, which are targeted at the Russian audience, Russian population. The only thing maybe here is just that when they say that Ukraine is colonized, and when Ukraine, for instance, tries to help the Afghan refugees or some other people that are also supported by the West, they in this way they say that by agreeing to give help, they show that they cannot resist, and because of occupation, colonization. So in this case, they have some link connection, but not in this particular example.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And let me read out our next comment. Japan has a territorial issue with Russia regarding 4 Kuril Islands stemming from World War II. After 3/4 of a century, there seems to be no progress. Today, Russia's position is that the issue is non-existent. I wonder if Ukraine can learn any lesson from Japan's experience. Ukraine's case is far stronger than Japan's, and most countries support Ukraine's case. But in history, we've seen many instances of betrayal.
I guess Ukraine, of course, can learn something. However, as for me, the cases are a little bit different. First of all, because of the time when this happened, and of how it happened, and how these issues are important for Ukraine, Russia, and the world. But I hope that the issue of Crimea and the Kuril Islands will be closed for in favor of Ukraine and Japan, respectively. But I am not an expert in the Kuril Islands, so I cannot say what lessons could be. Maybe the person who writes the comment would know better.
Maybe somehow this next comment will be connected with the previous question about the case of Japan and Ukraine. I wonder if you did any investigation on how Ukraine is positioned in the Western media, because partially it's also part of disinformation campaigns and disinformation wars, especially when a country doesn't have extensive network in terms of media representation, for example. And unfortunately, a lot of information is taken from the Russian mass media outlets as well. So I wonder how Ukraine positions itself in Western media, and on the other hand, how Ukraine is positioned by the Western media as well.
It's a problem that Ukraine does not invest and did not invest a lot of money into its positioning in the West. So you mentioned it right that Ukraine was described by the people who wrote about Ukraine. They were usually stationed based in Moscow, not in Kyiv, so the correspondents. And that was the problem, because a lot of materials about Ukraine were really a Russian position in some sense. But since 2014, the situation has changed because due to the war and the occupation and the post-Maidan events in Ukraine, foreign correspondents became interested in Ukraine. They came to Ukraine. Many of them stayed in Ukraine and live in Ukraine now as well. So that the situation has changed a little bit, and they had this pro-Ukrainian, mostly pro-Ukrainian perspective. Ukraine, there were some attempts. There was a few years ago a Ukrainian international channel. There were some private international channels. Now we have this Dom TV channel, actually Zelensky's initiative, which is in Russian language. The same I was talking that we have also to target this Russian language audience abroad. So there are some attempts taking place, but obviously there is not enough. And I guess that's initiatives and events like Crimea Platform, they have to somehow raise attention to Ukraine and that drew attention to Ukrainian issue and help Ukraine to be again on the international agenda. But still there is more work has to be done, especially on the diplomatic level, so that diplomatic representative for Ukraine has to work more closely with the media, with the journalists in their respective countries. And also Ukraine has to invite more international journalists to Ukraine so that they cover Ukrainian affairs, not from Moscow or Warsaw, but from Ukraine, from Kyiv.
So I see that we are running out of time, but still I would like you to touch upon Putin's essay about Ukraine and Russia, so to speak, being one people and almost one state. So I spent a few weeks in Ukraine this summer, and I noticed that while some engage in a conversation about this essay, others prefer to dismiss it and by saying that it's just a fake narrative. However, it does exude some influence and some power, not only on the Ukrainians, but on other states. And my perception of this essay is that this essay is not for the Ukrainians, but it's for non-Ukrainians, for those who surround Ukraine. So what do you think is accomplished by this essay, and what do you think can be and will be accomplished in the future by this sort of official narrative that somehow interferes with Ukraine as an independent state? When a leader of a different state takes this responsibility to read and present his vision of this country's history to I would say to the world community.
Personally, I remain optimistic because I hope that this essay will have no impact on the situation and on Ukraine's position in the world. Concerning the essay itself, it was first of all mostly directed to non-Ukrainians, as you mentioned, right, and to Russians, and to show that to the Russians once again that so that Ukraine is kind of Ukrainians and Russians are the same nation, which was actually not only a one-time narrative made and distributed and proposed by Putin, but was a centuries-long, probably idea of the Russian authorities, Russian Empire, and then the USSR. So there is nothing new in this. As for me, Putin just wanted to remind about this once again. Before, actually, it happened, if I am not mistaken, before Ukrainian anniversary of Ukrainian independence. So he wanted to show that there is nothing to celebrate, that just come back and we will be together again because we are the same people, the same nation, which is definitely not true at all. And those who want to understand it. So I don't think there should be some maybe sociological or other research about this, or how people what people think about this essay and about this idea. And as far as I remember, not so many people now in Ukraine agree with his statement and with this statement. The problem with Ukraine is that Ukraine did not claim its historical legacy, and like Rus or other important periods in Ukrainian history. And that's why Russia could use this whole history of this legacy in its favor. Now Ukraine has to invest more time in this, more human resources in this, of the historians, of the people who understand and can talk about it, that this is Ukrainian history, not Russian history. And in doing this, we would be able to position ourselves on this international historic map, and to say that Ukraine and Russia are different. Not only now since 1991, but before that, Ukraine was also different, a different nation, a different country.
But while we do that, we should be aware of another danger of being told that we are nationalizing history now, and that we are offering some sort of nationalized narratives which can be biased. So for our final comment, we'll go back to the Crimea topic again, and we've got another question. Do you think that if Russia gains power over Crimea, it will have implications for Russia attempting to assert power over all of Ukraine in the future?
I personally I don't think that Russia, of course, it has some implications. That of course Russia tries to assert power over all of Ukraine, and it's not only about the future; it's also about the past and about the current. But the Crimea was, I guess, something different. It was about it. For as far as I understand, in Putin's understanding, it was something sacred to him, something that he wanted to get back, to show off Russia's power again to the world. But Ukraine is another example. Fortunately, Ukraine is supported by many countries, and Ukrainian position was supported in the United Nations General Assembly, that Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Of course, they would try to threaten Ukraine, I mean Russia, to threaten by military force, which they do every year, and did 2 times this year in spring, and when there was massive buildup of Russian army on the eastern borders of Ukraine, and many of them are still remain there. And the other example, when they had this Zapad-West 2021 military exercises in Belarus and part of Russia. But also they threaten Ukraine with energy, gas, first of all, transit and supplies. They threaten Ukraine on political and diplomatic fields. I would agree here with the assumptions that they are not interested so much in gaining military control over Ukraine, but rather by having Ukraine some kind of similar to Belarus, where they can influence their power externally, but all of the problems will be decided, taken by the Ukrainian authorities at that time. That's why they invest so much money in pro-Russian media in Ukraine, even though most of them are now banned in the political parties, in politicians. Otherwise, they wouldn't do this, I guess.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oleksandr, for this very informative conversation and for your detailed analysis of the narratives which are used in the Russian media. And of course, thank you for maintaining the visibility of these topics about the Crimea platform on the international level. Thank you.
Thank you to Natalia.
Well, thank you so much for attending our event today. Today, we spoke with Oleksandr Yaroshchuk, who presented on the Crimea Platform and Ukraine's independence in the Russian media. Thank you so much. Information about upcoming events will be posted on our UkrSO listserv and on our Facebook page, Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. You can view previous lectures and talks on our YouTube channel, and for our future talks and lectures, please subscribe to our channel. Again, thank you for attending our event today.